you can't rush the experience. The experience, that comes from writing a program, reviewing a program, communicating with the athlete, coaching the athletes, and then not to mention it's a whole new can of worms, communicating with coaches, communicating with the medical staff, communicating with parents and so on, all the different stakeholders. And there is, in my opinion, there's no rush, or there's no shortcut to developing that.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. My name is James Grigson, and today I'm joined by the Senior Athletic Performance Specialist for Rehab and Sports Science for the GWS Giants AFL, Simon Harries. Simon, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks, James. Well, good to be here.
That's a mouthful of a title, mate, but you've certainly earned it. I'm very interested in the year that has been for you guys. Obviously, within the AFL and the Giants themselves, you were subject to some of the bubble restrictions and travel restrictions and the season complications that came from the pandemic. So, one of the biggest things that I've heard is some of the travel stories that have come from that, maybe being at if you were going to a certain location, having to quarantine and then bubble, and just the different training environments and stresses that might have put your team under, or the challenges for you as a rehabilitation and sports scientist. Are you able to talk through some of the challenges or even some of the maybe even delightful changes that the change of structure might have given you during that time, during the season?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the big thing that changed for the AFL season was the introduction of a bubble system. And so even when all the teams got forced to go away into various hubs, mostly up in Queensland, the bubble system really just meant for us was that we continued to live, I think it was under level 3 lockdown restrictions. So what that meant for our operation as staff and players within that bubble is that we couldn't probably do what the rest of the public were doing when the restrictions eased, particularly in New South Wales and when we're in Queensland, where the restrictions were minimal for the general public. So what it meant was things that we could go out for essential services, food and clothing and things like that. But we weren't able to go into a cafe, for example, and sit down. We get takeaway coffee and so on. So what that really meant is we just really lived 100% inside work, I would say, for the year. Because it was fine, from I suppose a mental health perspective, if you had a range of structures at home or, elsewhere in your life that you could, busy yourself with the downtime. But I think the people that did struggle were those that maybe didn't have those other outlets, and it was just work, and then you couldn't really do much, so they just keep thinking about work. I think that's probably the biggest challenges. From a travel perspective, we went to Perth for 3 weeks with the Giants, and we did have to go into a 2-week quarantine period, and you can't complain about it because we're quite fortunate. We didn't have to quarantine in one hotel room staring at 4 walls for 2 weeks. The AFL sorted a hotel where we pretty much had the run of a certain section of the hotel where there was meal rooms, and they set up a strength and conditioning facility in one of the kind of function centers, and there was games rooms for the players and so on. So it wasn't that bad. But we're only able to leave the hotel for training and matches.
So the struggles don't, for you as a coach, the struggles don't seem to be so much about maybe the facilities or any sort of maybe things like loading considerations. It was more of a case of the mental health of the group, both the coaching staff and the players. Is that a fair
Yeah, there was
assessment?
there was a few, facilities and equipment, restrictions that we had to work around, because essentially we had to pack up and leave our training base. So, we weren't able to take all equipment that we might usually have at our disposal. And as a result of the restrictions, it was more challenging to, for example, let's say we wanted to run someone on an Alter G treadmill, getting access to one of those was more difficult, if not impossible for certain times, because that meant interacting with the public. So we weren't able to do those things. But you're right, the mental side of it, for both the players and staff, that was the challenging part.
Yeah, interesting, mate. And I could go on for a fair while about maybe the biological stresses and how that would have affected the player's performance potentially, and what you might have done there. But the purpose of the show is to get onto you and your journey. And I'm really interested. I consider you a very inquisitive guy. In our interactions that we've had together, I feel like you're quite a thorough individual who really likes to look at things from all angles, and correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm really interested in how you got into the industry. So what caught your eye about sports science, and take me through, sort of you went to did your tertiary studies in Newcastle, but what got your hook into this industry? How did you want to get into sports science?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose broadly talking about sports science, I think, that's strength and conditioning for me as well. Because I definitely consider myself a strength and conditioning coach first, and then a sports scientist second. So yeah, as you said, I went to uni at the University of Newcastle, but I did an undergraduate degree in physical education and teaching. So I didn't actually go there to become a sports scientist or an exercise scientist. And I was actually on a placement in my second year at a school not too far from home, and just one of the teachers there was actually quite a good long jumper, and we ran into each other, funny enough, at the gym that we both trained at. And off the back of that, I just kind of hung out with him a little bit, and we did some training together. And I was learning about what his training looked like, from the coach that was looking after him, and that really just piqued my interest. And then an opportunity arose at the Newcastle Knights in their junior development system. They're just looking for a volunteer-based coach to work with their under 16s and under 18s players. And that long jumper, Sean, he knew that at the time, the performance manager of the Knights. So there was just that little connection there, through, I suppose, a couple of degrees of separation, where, Sean said to Lee Clark, who was the performance manager, oh, this person might be interested. And I was, and I jumped at it and really enjoyed it from the moment I got in there.
So is it more the training that sort of you were having with that the long jumper there that got you a bit more interested in the different training mechanisms and whatnot, and then that obviously then sparked your interest to get into that role at Newcastle? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, mate. That's and then talk me through the journey. So from there, you're still studying sports science at the time, and then within your time at Newcastle, you started the PhD, or was that after your time at Newcastle you got into the PhD?
Yeah. So I was in my second year of PE teaching, and so for the next 3 years, because it's a 4-year degree, I was doing that, and the junior development work with the Knights. And that just every year, that just got a little bit more in terms of how much I was doing. It was still a volunteer-based position. But, I got a small honorarium each year, but it was all volunteer. And so what ended up happening is I saw at the end of my PE teaching degree, I knew that as much as I enjoyed teaching, that strength and conditioning and potentially working in sport was what I wanted to do. And so not having done an undergraduate degree in sports science, I really looked at, I suppose, my strengths and weaknesses and thought, okay, will I actually get a full-time job if I'm competing against people that have got an undergraduate degree in sports science. And at the time, the ECU Masters in Strength and Conditioning was also, quite strong, and still is, but that there was less offerings in that space, whereas now, multiple universities offer a strength and conditioning or sports science. Sorry, that's my dog in the background barking.
That's right.
So I was kind of looking at that and thought, okay, I can't compete against those people from their academic background. I thought, okay, well, how can I set myself apart just a little bit? And so one of my lecturers at the time in PE teaching, David Lubens, so his research background is really strong in resistance training in adolescents, focused on, physical activity space, but in schools and so on. But, we spoke at length about, the opportunities that might arise by doing a PhD. And so that was not only providing further study and specialization in an area of strength and conditioning and sports science, but it also was opening up a door for potential academic work at that time and also in the future. So that's how that kind of came to be. And then what happened was I went to the Knights and said, look, I'd like to do a PhD. But as a result, I'm going to need to lock in access to the athletes to do a range of, assessments and intervention. And they were all for it. And they came to the party and said, yeah, that's great. They offered me a scholarship to do that. And then there was a change of coach. And as a result, that coach was bringing in his performance team. And that just created a lot of uncertainty for what might happen with the PhD. And by that point, I was already 6 months into my PhD, had done all the legwork for the project that I wanted to do and so on. And I was thinking, okay, I can't start an intervention and then have the rug pulled out from underneath me a few weeks in because there's a change of staff. So at the time I'd picked up a little bit of casual strength and conditioning work with some of Australian rugby's athletes that were in Newcastle, their junior athletes. And so what I decided to do was approach Australian rugby with a proposal to basically increase the size of their squad that they had in their junior development in Newcastle, and said, look, I'll run it, but I want access to the players to, to do my studies. And they were really happy with that and came to the party, and that's how I kind of moved into rugby.
Wow. How old were you when that happened?
How old was I? So I had a couple of years off after school before going to uni. So I think I would have been like 24, maybe.
Mate, that's fascinating, because the balls to be able to put that plan together, the foresight, and then walk up to, you might have just been walking up to an individual that you knew for a long time, but walk up to Australian rugby and say, hey, look, increase your program size. I'll take it on. Just let me do my PhD. That's something that, as a part of a story that I haven't heard from the people that I've interviewed so far. Just especially at that sort of age as well. Talk to me about the thought process there about just making that opportunity happen.
Yeah, it was a little bit of good timing as well. As I said, I picked up a little bit of work with them, a couple of hours a week with they had like 6 talented players in Newcastle. And I knew they'd kind of wanted to expand that program. And so, yeah, it was just good timing, I think, James, just being able to say, right, look, I can continue to do what I'm doing, but just instead of only looking after 6 players, 6 young athletes, we can increase that to 30.
Wow. So then you're able to complete the PhD through Newcastle Uni, and get a foot in the door with Rugby Australia as well, which then assisted in your next role and transition there. Am I correct in understanding that timeline? Talk me through the transition from there.
That's exactly right. So I got 2 years, just under 2 years into my PhD, and I completed the actual study portion. So the intervention that I undertook was like 3 months with one group and then 3 months with another group. And then there was an opportunity, a job came up very similar to what I was doing in Newcastle, but based in Sydney with their squads there at the time that was operating under they called it the National Academy. So they had a base in Sydney, in Brisbane, and Canberra, and so it was a job in that unit. And yeah, I was lucky enough that I was asked to apply for it, and I didn't interview that well. I don't think I was quite nervous because that was, and that's, I think everyone listening, hopefully, is if you want to get into sport, there, you think and you go, okay, that's my opportunity to get a full-time job. And so I probably went into the interview, quite nervous. Maybe didn't do so well, but I think I was probably fortunate enough that I had backing from one of the people on the panel, and they knew what I was about, and because I had a relationship with them for a few years prior, that that got me over the line.
Talk to me about that interview, actually. Not to bring up bad memories for you, but how would you have done it differently? What made you say that the interview was bad?
Oh, to be honest, I don't remember the specifics of the questions they may have been asking and so on, but I think I remember I fumbled through the questions. Maybe I waffled on a bit longer than I needed to, or so on. And I think had my time again, I would have maybe prepared a little bit more with some specific answers to questions I thought they might ask. And I think probably just prepare a little bit more to try to take the nerves out of it. But I think that comes with being a young person trying to get into the market where how many people you're competing against. So I hope they saw the nervousness, that it was actually a good thing. It's like, this person actually really wants to do this.
Yeah. Throughout that time, or throughout the story, through Newcastle, and as you transition to Oz Rugby, there was a few things that you said. You've mentioned luck. You've mentioned a couple of degrees of separation in terms of a network. I'm really interested, because a lot of people when they're starting out, they almost feel like they don't know where to start, and I do understand what they mean, because it seems like there is a relatively large circle, but it is a circle of people that all sort of, we call it the merry-go-round in pro sport here when it happens, but there's certainly other merry-go-rounds and circles and rings that happen within the industry across the globe. People often see that as a bit of a barrier of entry. How do we get into that circle? And I think your story of, I just knew one guy who knew one guy, and it didn't have to be this big song and dance to get into the circle. It was just, I made friends with someone, started talking to someone, and then away we went. That's not going to be the same case for absolutely everybody. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that the simple thing of just reaching out to whoever it may be, it might just be a local coach in the area, starts that network and starts those degrees of separation that you're referring to. Did you have any more to add to that?
So when I did first get into that first role at the Knights, back then, Facebook or Instagram, and Twitter, I don't even know if they existed back then. So unlike, people starting out now that they have access to connecting with so many different professionals around Australia and the world, that just wasn't on my radar. So, and I remember I used to talk to my bosses at the Knights all the time, like, oh, I can't wait. I really want that full-time job. Like, what have I got to do? What have I got to do there? How do I do this? And they preach patience. Just do your time. It'll take time. Don't rush it. I remember them talking about a previous guy who'd been in my role many years before, and it took him 8 years of part-time strength and conditioning work before I got his first full-time job. So you go, okay, wow, 8 years, that's what I'm up against. And they preach patience. I was really lucky. There was a strength and conditioning coach at the Knights called Tim Rogers, who's really, really experienced. He'd have, over 25 years experience in the field. And he was really good, and he directed me to things I should read, whether textbooks, it was websites that had, quality blogs, anything. Is like, okay, I think you should read this, read that, and so on. And I remember a piece of advice that he gave me was, he said, don't be in a rush, because the people that are in a rush get found out because they get into a role before they're ready. And you only have your reputation once. And if you tarnish your reputation by, you may potentially eagerness to jump into a role that you're not yet ready for, that can hurt you in the long run. And I took that to heart, actually. I had an opportunity to potentially, not that I didn't even apply for the job, but it was an opportunity to potentially apply for a role in the UK, which was just at the start of my PhD, so I hadn't really done anything yet. And I really took that messaging and thought, nah, you know what? I'm not sure that I'm ready yet to step into a role on a full-time basis. I think I need to keep learning, keep developing my own philosophies and so on. So they were good people.
Mate, that's fascinating, because I think, there's a lot of talk, and you and I were talking just offline about the people's thoughts around, okay, experience over tertiary qualifications and how soon is too soon. And I think it's interesting that you said what you said, or the advice that Tim had given you, because if the coaches of yesteryear had 8 years of experience before they become a head of a program, or whatever it may be, I'm not necessarily talking about monetary, I'm just talking about their leadership role, then it's almost as if the industry can't go back. Like, the industry can't have a shorter pathway to being the head of a program. When we talk about eager individuals, it's almost like they can't do that, because now you're going to get less experienced people that might not necessarily be as good at the role as those that took the time. It's an interesting comment that you made. I'm just thinking out loud, because it's when you said that, it made me think, okay, well, there almost is an inbuilt maturation period that young coaches have to go through to be ready, because the industry is used to that level of experience in that role.
Yeah, and I don't, now there's so much access to information now, and you can do your tertiary education, you can, gain a heap of accreditations, you can read, you can listen to podcasts, and, really just absorb information from so many different avenues. But I think you can't rush the experience portion. And the experience, that comes from writing a program, reviewing a program, communicating with the athlete, coaching the athletes, and then not to mention, it's a whole new can of worms, communicating with coaches, communicating with the medical staff, communicating with parents, and so on, all the different stakeholders. And there is, in my opinion, there's no rush, or there's no shortcut to developing that. And so when I look back and before I got my first role, is I had some tertiary qualifications under my belt. I had done my ASCA level 1 and level 2, I think, at that time. But I also had 5 years of experience, and it wasn't full-time experience, but it was 5 years. And I took every experience I could early on. I had said I had the stuff with the Newcastle Knights, but I also went to my local rugby team that I played for when I was a kid, and did the strength and conditioning work for them, and the sports trainer work as well. So, I learned to tape and just, all of that kind of stuff. There's just more experience. I did a little bit of personal training work. It was just experiencing coaching people. So I just don't think you can rush that.
One thing before we move off your time in Newcastle and that sort of transition period into more full-time roles in the industry, What were you doing for paid work? Because when I hear that you were doing a little bit here and S&C there and you're studying there, and I understand that maybe when you were doing your PhD, there would have been some grants or funding that would have come your way, which would have been helpful. But I envision there would have been a period of time, whether it be months or years, where you were doing a couple of different roles like we all do, but then still trying to make ends meet. I mean, I'm interested in you sharing those stories because it's something that I don't think is factored in when people, they go, oh yeah, I've got to get in the industry. I've got to do these sorts of roles, and I'm not going to get paid. But it's like, well, how do you fit in the other hours to make ends meet?
Yep. So when I was doing the PE teaching degree, to make ends meet there, I mowed lawns with a family friend, just 1 or 2 days a week. I did some landscape labouring, worked the typical jobs in a bar, so on. Just any job there, just to make a little bit of money. One thing that is good about Newcastle, at least at the time, and a share house situation, is I think I was paying like $85 a week in rent.
There you go. Yeah.
And me and my best friend both were doing PE teaching, and we both lived together with another friend from school. And I remember we used to shop, and we used to pride ourselves shopping on spending less than $40 at the shops. So we actually didn't need that much money to live. And because I was studying, I was able to access youth allowance and from the government, from Centrelink. So, that was a top up to live. And then I was really lucky with the PhD that I was able to get a scholarship, one of the government scholarships, which was, I suppose it's kind of a little bit like minimum wage. So, that was able to fund living while studying.
Man, it's pretty stock standard sort of jobs that you laid out there, but I hope that people took away the cunningness of the $40 a week shop and just having a network of people that are going to push you in that direction. We are getting close on time, so I wanted to jump to your time at Australia Rugby, and I'm interested in the transitions in roles. So there was, I think from memory, there was about 3 roles there that you transitioned through, and it seemed as if, to put it in sort of typical terms, you climbed the ranks. At the end of your time there, you were looking after the rehabilitation for the Rugby Sevens program, and had a lot to do with the Australian men's as well, the 15 side. I'm interested in those transitions, and at those periods of transitions, were they just sort of natural? It went, okay, Simon, you've done this here, now we need you over there, or was it something that you had to work for, and you went, I want that role, so what can I do to get that role? Talk me through those transitions.
So they were entirely natural. Yep. Every change of role within my time at Australian Rugby, or Rugby Australia as it's known now, just came about through periods of restructuring in the organisation, or someone else leaving a position which opened up a position. Yep. So the first role where I said I was in the National Academy system, so I went down into that role, and then after about a year being in that role, they scrapped that system for that aspect of their talent development program. And what they did is instead of the national body looking after the best, whatever 100 players in the country or whatever it was, they shifted responsibility back to the state-based team. So the New South Wales Waratahs, for example. So that meant a number of roles got made redundant in Australian Rugby. And I was really lucky that whilst my role got made redundant, they pivoted me into a different role. And that's how I got involved with, Fusion Sport and the Smarter Base system. So my role then moved into being 0.5 of the role was on the rollout of Smarter Base across all of Australian Rugby. So that was, Wallabies down to the under-20s team. And the other part of my role was the strength and conditioning coach for the national under-20s team. So I did that for, I think it was 2 years maybe in that role. And then at the Rugby Sevens programs, they'd had a couple of staff leave. They had a head of performance and who had picked up another job elsewhere. So they had some staff kind of filling roles on a kind of temporary basis until they had recruited for that role. And so I just was asked to go down and help out because they had a number of players injured at the time and they just need some more hands on deck. So I went down there for a few weeks and never left. It's kind of just like, just kind of organically went, okay. And then when they did find someone to replace the head of performance roles in the sevens program, in the men's program it was, and they're okay, well, what's the rest of the structure going to look like? They put me in a role that was the rehab coordinator across both the men's and women's program at the time, which then moved into just being just the men's for a couple of years. Yeah.
Mate, I was interested because you'd sort of said during your Newcastle days that you were kind of the mindset of, how can I get this next role or the next role? And I was interested to see whether that was the case in Oz Rugby days. Your last 2 years you spent in AFL with the GWS Giants, and I'm interested in this question. More comes from people that are potentially already in the industry and they are transitioning sport. The human body is the human body. The fundamental principles still underlie performance in general, but I am interested in your thought process moving from rugby union to AFL. There are some differences in training and the things that you would have to think about in your role. Talk me through that transition period. Were you excited for the new challenge? Was it a little bit daunting? Was it just sort of, oh yeah, the body's the body, let's rock and roll? What was the thought process there?
Yeah, so I was really excited for the role change and the sport change. So I had been in rugby for 7 years. So it was time in my mind for a change. And so the performance manager who had been at the rugby sevens program, Nick Poulos, he had moved across to GWS, and that's how I ended up getting involved. He recruited me across. And so Nick had previously been, before his time at rugby sevens, he'd spent a few years at the Adelaide Crows.
Yep.
So in my time working with him at the sevens, I think I'd learned quite a lot off him, of his experience in AFL, and he'd brought a lot of those experiences to the rugby sevens program, which are really a hybrid athlete that definitely do sit right in the middle between a 15-a-side rugby player and an AFL player. And depending on the position in AFL, you could actually argue they're reasonably close. So the time in rugby sevens, I think, had really set me up for a more seamless transition into AFL. But yeah, it was getting across there, was just learning, a whole new sport, which was exciting. The biggest challenge for me, because I was moving into a rehab role, and one of the most important aspects of my role is transitioning a player back to full training. So I really take a lead that once someone's at a certain competency level, taking them from they can run, they can cut and so on and jump. Now, how do we get them ready to train fully and play? So it was really learning the skills and the demands of different training drills, so I could really understand, okay, that player at this point of their rehab, they're in a position where it's, calculated risk, safe to perform that training drill with the team. But no, they can't do that training drill. That's maybe a little bit beyond where they're at from a readiness to go into, chaotic and reactive environments with speed and, and so on, and so many factors to consider there. And so it was really getting an understanding there and go, okay, I've decided that player can't do that training drill. How am I going to take them from where they are now then to get them ready for that training drill, which they might do in a week's time or 2 weeks' time? So that was the biggest learning curve for me, trying to understand how to build those bridges between what you might see typically in rehab, running a lot of straight lines or a lot of cone-based agility drill and so on. How do we take them from that controlled environment to the unpredictable nature of training and matches.
And just quickly, for those that are watching and curious, what are some of the resources that you tapped into to inform yourself on those sorts of principles?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I did is I got straight in with the coaching staff.
Yeah.
And, figured out very quickly, okay, which coach is going to be the go-to coach to help the rehab injured players. And so it was really fortunate at AFL, you've got a number of coaches, so that often the coach of the NEFL team or the second division team will often be given the additional responsibility to help with rehab. So developing a relationship with that coach and go, okay, this is the end goal. Can you help me take a step back, take 2 steps back, 3 steps back, so we can build a player back through those steps, so we can make sure their transition is seamless.
Mate, I'm sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, further to that, with the amount of data you can have at your fingertips through our GPS monitoring in particular, I was able to also understand really quickly what were the physical demands of different training drills. So using that information in context with what the coaches are seeing and what they want to do, putting those two things together to go, okay, this is what we need to get to.
Mate, that's I can sense the excitement in your voice when you're talking about all those sorts of chaotic environments and things that you did have to learn. So it sounds like it was a really nice transition into AFL. To finish off here, I always ask a question of our guests, and it really surrounds people. Either look, you can take this down the route of somebody who's transitioning roles, or is that a moment in their career where they're looking at, okay, what's next, and you might want to take the question down that route, or you might want to take the question down the route of advice for people just getting into the industry. So I'll throw it to you. What sort of advice would you give to people, A, looking for a new change, or B, just starting out in the industry?
Well, I think, what I would say is a suitable answer for both questions there. I think no doubt you have to have qualifications and the relevant accreditations through the ASCA or ESSA or UK SCA, whatever it is. But then you have to have experience, and that experience doesn't have to be in a professional team. It can be with a local team. It can be with the youth teams, which, in my opinion, working with youth is probably more valuable than working with adult athletes if you're not going to be able to make any decisions. So, for example, if you came and did an internship with the GWS Giants, you will learn a lot. You have access to some really experienced practitioners, but the reality is you won't make many decisions. Whereas if you go and spend a year with a junior elite team or a junior team at any level, you'll make decisions. And that's really important for the development of your experience. So I think if someone's looking to get into the industry, they have to really critically evaluate their CV and how would it stack up against everyone else that they're going up against in a job. And then make sure when you're looking at your CV, and I say CV, but I mean just an analysis of yourself, really look, and this is for someone changing roles as well, really look at your skill sets and understand where you have value and work to continue to enhance the value in that area. So for me, when I was going through my roles at Rugby Australia, and this is what helped me get the job at GWS, I had 2 skill sets that were really strong. Is I knew Smarterbase, and I knew how to manage data, and I knew that system inside and out. And I had skills in rehabilitation and reconditioning. They were my two 1-woods, if you like, for golfing analogies.
And I'm keen to get out on the weekend.
Yeah. So I made sure that, I continued to develop those two things, and I, in an authentic way and not being arrogant about it, I promoted to people who were decision makers. And when maybe I was approached or I approached people, I really made sure people knew that I have expertise in those two areas. But very importantly, I made sure it was known that I also can do A, B, C, D, E, which I think, particularly now as a result of COVID, you have to be a generalist with one or two very strong specialities. And so I think that's how someone needs to reflect on, where they stack up against others. And if they can't decide what their speciality is, or maybe they don't have one yet, and they need to decide, well, based on their interest and their skills, and what are they going to do? How are they going to really hone one of those one woods?
Aside from getting me excited for a round on the weekend, mate, that's a fantastic answer. Simon, I do want to thank your time today. It was like I said to you before, you're very particular and deliberate individual in the way you present, talk, and I do like spending time and speaking with you. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, James. It was a pleasure.
For those that are interested and do want to watch more, our last interview is just up here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, you can click down here. For James and Simon, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching.